How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. As you can tell by people watching this can tell clearly that we're in Paris.
Yes, it's worth you coming all this way.
Right, exactly. So I just want to start by saying congrats. Apparently when you're playing anyone named Marie, you do exceptional work.
There's a reason I think these Maries, thank you for that, there's a reason these Maries came into my life at the same time. I don't know what the reason is. I'm yet to discover the reason, but there was definitely a reason. So I had Marie Colvin and Marie Curie, and they both left a kind of lasting impact on me. Exceptional women, I suppose, and they live inside you. They kind of hit me on a sort of vascular level, I think, or a kind of chemical level. They live big lives, and it gets into your bloodstream, I think.
Yeah, well,
does that sound weird?
Oh,
no, but they do, I think.
Yeah, no, completely. And they're both so amazing and so different.
Yeah, and lived at different eras, but they're both driven and with a certain level of ambition that I really admire, and they're unapologetic and direct and speak their minds. And I think those are all qualities. And I think the thing that really draws me to characters more than anything these days is courage, and I think they both exhibit tremendous courage. I really do think that's the quality in people generally that I admire above all others.
There is, for this film, her life is so incredible, and what she was able to accomplish in the time period, even today, the fact that it was over 100 years ago, when you were researching, what were some of the things that really shocked you or were surprised to learn?
Well, I think one of the interesting things is that although it's remarkable to us that she was a woman in this man's world, I mean, you see there's this amazing photograph of the Solvay conference in Norway with all the eminent scientists of the era, and they are all men, apart from Madame Curie in the front row. And she's the only one not posing for the camera. So it ends up having the effect of making all the fellas look very pompous. And she's sort of just in conversation because it's like she's too impatient. She doesn't want to waste her time with anything as trivial as having her photo taken. So it kind of gave me a big clue as to who she might have been. But she never referred to herself as a woman or an oddity because she was a woman. It's really her biographers who have sort of placed her as a woman in a man's world. She just lived equality. She never sort of fought for it. She just lived it as her right. And the other thing is, I think, the science we now know from, laboratories that we see on the news or in any, it's so different from the conditions under which Pierre and Marie Curie were working. They had a kind of crumbling garden shed, and they were beating up, thousands of tons worth of pitchblende, this mineral from which they extracted uranium ore, and from uranium ore they got to radium and polonium, the two elements that they discovered. But I mean, this was not sort of very delicate work in lab. This was hard labor, grinding up this matter and then, boiling it, filtering it, distilling it, and finally, eventually, after years of work, ending up with these two extraordinary elements. I mean, that must be, I just can never get over, you have a marriage, you have this mutual adoration, respect, and a sort of shared meeting of minds, and together you have two children, but this other child that you bring into the world is radium, is that you unleash upon the world the magic, the mystery, and the might of radioactivity. It blows my mind, because in that night, there's that night in the scene in the film when they're still alone and they've got this glowing element. They've got radium in their hands. And of course we know with our position in the 21st century that, all the terrible things as well as the wonderful things that have been released and unleashed by the discovery of radioactivity. So it kind of has an extra resonance for us. And whereas in their time they were just, enchanted by the mystery.
One of the things is that I think people would be surprised to learn that back then, you really couldn't make a living being a scientist. It was a struggle just to get the money, and now people can make, it's a completely different era.
And Marie Curie, after, she discovered radium, she explained the mystery of radioactivity to the world. She couldn't afford her own gram of radium to work on, to continue experimenting on. And she was only when she went to America for the first time that a women's society in America clubbed together and put up the funding, and they all did a kind of crowd share project to buy Marie Curie a gram of radium, which she took back to Paris. Actually, when the war broke out, I believe she travelled down to the south of France. When she thought Paris was going to be bombed, she took a gram of radium down to the south of France.
Sorry.
No, transported it. So it was this sort of incredibly precious thing to her all her life. Yeah. But yes, they never got rich from it, for sure.
They took us to the museum this morning.
Oh, did they?
And we saw the case that she transported the gram of radium in, which is massive and lead.
Lead,
and
yeah.
To see what she did.
And you know, the door handle in the lab is still ever so slightly radioactive.
That's very.
Did you know that?
They did not tell us that.
He's now clocking back to see how much you touched it.
No, they did say that in 1981 that they had to scrub the lab to get rid of the hot spots. And I started wondering about all the people that had gone through, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Sure. And all her diaries and books and lab notes, they're all under lock and key because they're so highly radioactive still.
When you think back on the making of the film, filming in Budapest, I believe, what's like some of the things you will always remember and take away from the experience?
I will always remember the dancer that Marjane Satrapi brought in, because there was a dancer who was very inspired at the time by the work of Pierre and Marie Curie, and she devised this dance she called the radium dance. And Marjane had this vision that this figure would be a sort of something in Marie Curie's mind throughout the whole film. She was a dancer called Loie Fuller, and this brilliant dancer, very, very tall dancer, who's currently working, she's from New York, but she's currently working in a company in Antwerp. She came and did this, and she had so much soul, this woman, and the dance was so beautiful. It was electric. It was like she was given these big wings, so her arms were extended by sticks and sort of fabric that seemed like it was glowing. And I found those scenes so incredible. And when Marjane had this idea that after Pierre Curie tragically leaves the story, that Marie Curie would sort of picture the streets kind of Paris, almost like a kind of delusional, sort of almost psychedelic horror fantasy, and suddenly these dancers would be everywhere. And there was a moment that we filmed that with, all these radium dancers down a street, and I had to walk backwards through it. And it was so powerful. I mean, it was like, Marie Curie used to say she made the invisible visible, and I think Marjane did that with that scene. She sort of took somebody's gut feelings and put them on the screen. What are other scenes I particularly remember? I suppose, I really enjoyed things like having a daughter, and it's a privilege to sort of play older than you are, and quite funny. I enjoyed sort of before my time getting to do that scene where the daughter brings her boyfriend home for the first time, and Marie Curie does the opposite of what you're sort of hoping your mother would do, which is make your partner feel at ease. Marie Curie puts him on the spot and makes him feel as uncomfortable as possible, and I found it quite amusing to play that. And the actor I played with was very good.
I'm always curious, obviously, when you're making a movie or doing a TV, anything, you have your schedule. What are you hoping? Are you ever looking at the schedule and like the first day of filming and hoping for something? Because I would imagine the first day, there must be a lot of nerves on set.
Yes. Yes, the toughest first day I've ever had was on Barney's version, which I did with Paul Giamatti. We had to do this very, very emotional scene where as a couple they've separated and they come back together, and she realizes that he's got Alzheimer's but has always loved her. It's a very beautiful and emotional thing, and we had to do that right at the top of the show, and it was really, that's tough because you have to fill in a lot of gaps. But what did we do? We started in the faculties of the Sorbonne with this film, and it was all right. But every day I had to play young and old, so that was the kind of head screw that you usually started the day young and then started the day old and then got younger. But it was quite nice. It was sort of like you progress back to youth as the day goes on.
Yeah, I would imagine. I can't imagine. Barney's version is also a great film, but I would imagine that has to be brutal. Just trying to figure out everything.
I mean, hopefully you've done enough thinking and bits of rehearsal. And Marjane Satrapi on this was very good at planting seeds. I think of her as a gardener. So over a sort of year, she before we started shooting, she'd plant these seeds. One of the seeds that she planted was, I came to meet her in Paris, and we were sitting in one of the cafes you and I were just talking about before, and I was having a croissant and a coffee, and she passed me this piece of paper. It was in an envelope, and I started to read it, and it was one of the most beautiful expressions of love I've ever read, and it was this grief journal that Marie Curie kept in the days and weeks after Pierre's death, and it had never come to light until the year before we started filming. And it was everything you think you know about Marie Curie just evaporated in the minute that you read this pure expression of love from this woman for this man. And I was not expecting it, and I started, these tears just sort of fell into this croissant that I had. And it was, I thought from that moment on, I thought, okay, I know this woman. I know the fight, that determination, that drive, that ambition, but that underneath that there was this well of love that she had. And I think those are not many people saw it, I don't think. Not many people. And after she lost Pierre, I don't think she ever was able to rediscover that joy again. And it's, so she was an extraordinary person, but she lived a difficult life, I think.